Welcome to Success Matters. My guest today is Dr. Kathy Zhang, a palliative care doctor who has been on the front line of the COVID-19 pandemic, helping patients and families navigate end-of-life care in the midst of a global crisis. But that's not all there is to Kathy's story. Recently, she received a life-changing diagnosis of ADHD and is a life coach and podcaster, using her experiences and expertise to help others navigate life's challenges with resilience and purpose. Kathy, thank you very much for joining my podcast, Success Matters. You're a palliative care doctor, you're a podcaster, you're a property investor, plus a coach as well. So you've got lots of irons and lots of fires. The thing I wanted to start off with actually was on your last podcast, you talked about having been diagnosed with ADHD recently. So what was it that led you to getting a diagnosis, and how was the diagnosis actually determined?
It's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. So the ADHD, actually a friend of mine, someone that I'd worked with for my branding, we started sending, Instagram posts to each other, and she saw something that I resonated with, and she was like, "Do you have ADHD?" And I was like, "No, I don't. What are you talking about?" Right. And she sent me a post about common symptoms of ADHD that people may not be aware of, because usually what I had in my mind was, like impulsivity and being distracted. You can't sit still. And I didn't really have that. Right. And so that didn't really resonate with me. And then she sent me a post which had all of these symptoms with distractibility and emotional reactivity, emotional lability, time management issues, time blindness, all of these things. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. And so I am a physician. So there are criteria for diagnosis of ADHD and other mental health issues. So I looked it up and I was like, oh my God, I'm pretty sure I have it. But then I also didn't want to diagnose myself with it. So I actually finally, after about a year of thinking about it, I went to see a psychiatrist, and I was like, can you just confirm for me what I suspect about myself? Right. And it's been really interesting. I'm in my mid-30s to get this diagnosis, because it helps me understand my brain, how I work, how I function in a way that I'd never quite understood before. Before, it was always like, there's something wrong with me. Why can't I get organized? Why am I always late to things? Why does my brain work like this, or why does my brain not work? And just knowing the fact that there is a biological difference in how my brain produces certain neurochemicals, dopamine, for instance, and why I have felt the need to reward myself, quote unquote, right? I always felt like a child, because I had to be like, oh, if I do this work, then I can watch TV, or I can, go shopping, or I can give myself a massage. And it always felt so transactional. And now I understand why.
So if ever you had something to complete, it was having a reward at the end of it, you kind of made you feel like completing that task. Is that a fair summary of what you...
Exactly. So for those who may not know, like the ADHD brain has trouble with dopamine, right? So dopamine is the neurotransmitter that makes us feel good. When we do something fun, we get a rush of dopamine. Social media is a huge source of being able to get dopamine, because it's new. You scroll, there's something new, and you get more hits of dopamine, which is also why it's so addictive. And so, people with ADHD, they can hyper focus on something that they love, right? Let's say video games, television, their own creative pursuits, etc. But it's really, really hard to get initiated or to focus on things that they don't want to do. Right. So for myself, like taxes, I've been putting it off.
No one wants to do their taxes.
Exactly. And even the thought of it just paralyzes me. And so that's something I'm learning to work with for myself. And because of the way that our brains work, it's easier, at least I'll say for myself, to think outside of the box. So there's a higher percentage of entrepreneurs within who have ADHD and, out of the box thinkers, that sort of thing. And so in that sense, it's also my superpower.
So you also mentioned you're a physician. How did the ADHD, even though you kind of didn't know you had it, but you had it, of course, how did that affect you as you went through your studies and had to do all of it? And becoming a doctor is not easy, right? It takes a lot of effort. So how did you balance all of that?
It's a great question because when I got diagnosed, I was like, oh my God, I made it through residency, through medical school, like not knowing this about myself. I knew back then I'm a fairly good test taker. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it through.
Yeah.
And yet it was really hard for me to finish early. Like I always used most of the time, the maximum amount of time. And for me, what I realized I had to do as a compensatory thing was I had to have a schedule, a structure. Because if I didn't, nothing would get done. If you give me all day, my brain will just, go down a rabbit hole, and then I'll be online Googling the difference between llamas and alpacas, and have absolutely nothing to do with the task at hand. And so back then, I knew that the only way that I got things done was if I set a very rigid schedule for myself. It has to be on my calendar. I have to do this between these hours. And that sort of thing. And in that sense, it gave my brain something to be like, okay, task focused, cross it out, a little bit dopamine hit. At the end of it, a long day of studying, you get to, hang out with your friends, or you get to have dinner with your family, that sort of thing. And so even back then, when I was doing things to make up for the fact that what didn't come necessarily as naturally to me as it did for people who didn't have ADHD.
So was there always a reward at the end of like the task as were a day's worth of study? You can't count even like having dinner with your family as a reward to help motivate you towards that.
Yeah, I don't think I realized it back then, but now looking back, that is what I did for myself even as a child. I loved TV as a child. I'm an only child, and my parents worked a lot when I was a kid. And that was always kind of like the reward for me. Hey, you love this so much. I could spend hours and hours in front of the TV. If you do this, that sort of thing. And that's also why I felt really guilty as an adult to be like, why am I still relying on the reward system that worked for me as a kid? Why can't I outgrow that? So there was a lot of shame around that. But now realizing that's the easiest way for my brain to process that and to do things that I don't really love to do because, as adults in life, like you have to do things that you're not entirely jazzed about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, indeed. And one of my guests recently told me about her two children who are autistic, and there's a spectrum around autism. Is there a similar spectrum around ADHD?
Yes, absolutely. It's the same thing where it can be mild, moderate, severe. It impacts your level of functioning. Mm-hmm. There's also, kind of two categories where I fall more into the inattentive ADHD. And then there's also the hyperactive ADHD, where you see kind of more typically children who are just really can't sit still. They're always fidgeting and that sort of thing. And then there's kind of a combined part of that. And so there definitely is a spectrum. Some people need medication just to function. And some people, like myself, have found other non-pharmacologic ways of dealing with it, and or mine may not be as severe. So absolutely, everyone's experience is different, and everyone deals with it differently as well.
So we touched on your physician role. You are a palliative care doctor. And palliative care, for those that don't know, is what is it?
It's a great question. So I'm a hospice and palliative care doctor. So the way that I like to explain it is that I care for seriously ill and or terminally ill people. So I would say the palliative care is a bigger umbrella under which hospice falls under. So palliative care is a way of treating patients that focuses on whole person care. So physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and it helps improve the quality of life for patients and their families. That can start at any point someone is diagnosed. So let's say someone gets diagnosed with, commonly is cancer, but it could be heart disease, kidney disease, lung issues. And we can get involved from the moment of diagnosis of a serious illness all the way until the end.
Right.
And usually at the last, at least in America, the last 6 months of life is what someone would qualify for hospice, which is essentially kind of end of life care. And so that's a broad strokes overview of what I do in the hospital.
So what attracted you to palliative care?
Before I started palliative care, I was a generalist, kind of, I guess what you would call a GP in the UK, but I was working solely in the hospital. So I would care for patients who were sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, but I would care for all sorts of things, stroke, heart failure, infections, etc. And while I really loved it, I got really burned out. I was seeing 14 or 20 patients a day. I couldn't spend the time that I wanted to get to know them, to really get in deep with their symptoms, who they are as people. And so that connection was what I was really missing. And I thought about going back to training because I was already out on my own as an attending physician. I thought about it for a couple years, and finally I took the plunge to go back into training, and it's been the best thing. It's hard for people to think, like, how could you love spending all your time talking to people who are sick and dying? But I really do love it. It is a bit morbid, and it's really challenging days. And for me, I love the real stuff. I love when it's raw emotion. When people are sick and dying, you want to talk about anger, like you will meet the angriest people you've ever met in your entire life. If you want to talk about sadness, there's so much sadness there. And there's so much love. There's so much compassion. And so for me personally, like, I want to experience it all. I want to see all of it. I want to be witness to the human condition. And that's what makes me love it. And 6 or 8 months after I started my position as a hospice and palliative care doctor, we had COVID in New York City, where I work, where we were the first hit in our country. And so that was a brutal awakening to what I thought I wanted to do, right? It was as if the universe was like, oh, you like this work? You sure? Like, hold my beer. let me show you how it can get.
That's a good point. With COVID, did you have a lot more patients that were coming through your care because of the nature of the disease, or did you actually have fewer because of the restrictions in terms of social distancing and those sorts of things?
Oh, definitely the former.
Okay.
Our normal patient list was like in the 20s, and it quadrupled. I think we hit a max of like 89 just in a very short amount of time, like 1 or 2 weeks. Just ramped up super quick. We normally would have 1, maybe 2 patients pass away a week, and we had 6, 7, 8 patients pass per day.
Oh wow!
We couldn't even get to them. And like you said, there were no visiting restrictions. Everything was done over the phone. We had no idea what was going on, what this disease was. People were like, they were just fine 2 days ago. What do you mean they're dying? What do you mean you can't get them off the ventilator? What do you mean all this stuff? And so there was so much distress, patient part, family's part, on our part. And it really took a toll on me personally. I was in a very, very dark space. And with a lot of help, I was able to get out of it.
So how did you cope? Because that's a difficult thing to imagine. 6 or 7 patients a day dying under your care. It's got to take a massive toll on you.
Yeah, it did. And, I got to a point where I just was so numb from everything that was going on. Like, I was like, I don't want to wake up tomorrow. I don't want to deal with any of this. And, you know, it got to a point where I was like, I think I need help. I felt very isolated. I felt so alone. And some of my best friends are not in medicine. And so I was like, they don't understand. And so in my own way, whether through self-defense or not, I shut myself off from the world because there was just so much pain.
Right.
And finally, I told people about it. I told my friends about it. I told my husband, my parents, and they encouraged me to get help. And so luckily, I found a trauma-informed therapist. I worked with her for months. And then she, I like to say, got me out of that deep, dark hole back to kind of where my baseline was, where I could function, where I could get out of bed, where I wasn't crying, 9, 10 times a day, where I wasn't having panic attacks. And then I sought out coaching. And I like to say that therapy got me back to quote unquote normal, and coaching got me to see what was possible for my life afterwards.
We'll come on to your coaching soon, actually, but I wanted to explore the raw emotions that you see and deal with, because I suppose when people are told you've only got 6 months left or so, that really opens people's minds to actually what they may have missed out on, what they've done, what they haven't done, all those things. What sort of things do your patients say to you when they've been given that kind of notice that there is no more that medicine can do for you, and we're going to make you as comfortable as we can?
It's a great question. Some of the things that come up is just clarity and perspective. Those are the two biggest things, right? When you're being told that, hey, you have a limited amount of time left. And if you want to talk about it, in reality, we all have a limited amount.
Yeah.
Right? From the moment that we're born. And it's morbid to think about it. And depending on how we view it, depending on how we think about it, we can let it get us down, or we can use it as fuel. And that's why I started my podcast, to help people use it as fuel and to help them reprioritize what's important to them. So for my patients who do get a limited prognosis, a limited amount of time, they're like, I wish I hadn't spent so much time worrying about things that really didn't matter. One thing in Western culture is just the amount of time that we spend at work, at the office, chasing the next promotion, the salary bump, whatever it is, and getting that goal, and then just being like, that's not enough. What's next? And at the expense of our relationships, at the expense of connecting with other humans, at the expense of spending time with our loved ones, our friends, our family. So that's one huge thing that people at the end of life really wish that they'd spent more time on, and really work to try and be like, what can I do at this time, patch this up, to try and reach out to people that the relationships may have, severed, or something went awry. That's one big thing. Another thing is happiness. I think a lot of people, thought that one thing would make them happy, or, it'd be like, if I get this car, or if I buy this house, if I, marry this person, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they realize that happiness isn't necessarily always outside of themselves. Happiness is different. Happiness is, gratitude. A lot of times, gratitude, even during the times when my patients are at, their last raw of hope, they still find ways of being grateful. And those are the patients that are able to make it through the most difficult time in their lives a little bit easier. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It just means that it's a little bit more tolerable than for those who are just like, there's no hope whatsoever. There's nothing to be grateful for. There's nothing that I can, look forward to. And sometimes there's not.
How do you, so you do coaching as well. And as you were talking about the regrets of spending so much time at work, and we tend to, I suppose, there's many books written by many people who deal with palliative care that says the one big regret people will say is, I spent too much time at work and not enough time with my family or relationships. But the problem is we all tend to focus on that because we live in a world where, money makes the world go around, right? So how do you balance the need to do that and create maybe a better future for your family and for yourself versus spending so much time at work that you're not actually spending time with the family in the here and now?
It's a great question because it's so difficult. It's so difficult. We have so many demands on our time, our attention, our energy. And, for me, what it comes down to is intention, is how do we want to spend our time each day? How do we want to spend each moment? And the additive effect of each moment, each day, each month, that becomes how we spend our life. I always like to say how we spend our time is how we spend our life. And so, of course we have to work. Of course we need to make a living. Of course we need money to support us. And it doesn't have to be all that we do. It does. And, the type of work that we do as well. There's so many people out there who are, doing things or working just to get a paycheck to pay the bills and dreaming of something else, right? And it's not always possible for people to, let's say, just quit their jobs and go follow their dreams. We have bills to pay, that sort of thing. And if we can intentionally find ways, make decisions, take action to slowly pivot our lives, our work towards things that matter to us, towards things that are in line, in accordance with our values, with what's important to us, that is what my patients say gives their lives meaning. That's what they feel is like, oh, I spent my time on earth doing things that meant something to me. And it's not easy. And the more aware we are of it, the easier it gets.
So when you take your experiences from your patients and your coaching and put that together, that sounds like it could be quite a powerful combination because you've got people who are expressing maybe regrets, but maybe also the great things that happened in their life. And you're able to apply that into your coaching world to people who you're coaching. How much do the two come together in the coaching that you do and also in what you record on your podcasts?
Yeah, another great question. For a while, I struggled even myself to find the intersection between the two. So I was like, what does a hospice and palliative care doctor have to do with life coaching and, helping people create lives that they want, et cetera? And for me, what I realized was in both parts of my work, it's all about improving people's quality of life, right? And so from the patient perspective, there may not be anything that we can do to take the cancer away or to make the disease any better. But what we can do is to help treat their symptoms, to help them, feel as good as possible with the time that they have left. And in the life coaching with my clients is, how do we improve your quality of life? Whatever that means to you, because quality of life means something different to every single person. Yeah. Right. And so for some people, that's being able to spend more time with their family. For some people, that is, hitting a certain monetary goal. For some people, that is, taking charge of their health, their wellness, and their lifestyle. For some people, that is, starting a business and putting their voice out there and being on social media. So whatever it is, improving people's quality of life so that they can then spend the time that they want to give themselves freedom, time freedom, monetary freedom, personal freedom, whatever it is. And so that's how I like to blend the two and to have people, I like to say that I bring the heart and the compassion of a hospice doctor, but also the strategies and the vision of a life coach into my practice.
I like the actual kind of perspective that you put on there, that in both instances, you're helping people live a better life. whether it's looking out for a patient or whether it's coaching someone through their life journey, the ultimate goal is to help someone lead a better life. Is there any outcomes that you'd like to share with us from any particular coaching clients that you've had where actually, you've taken a story or an experience from one of your patients that you've been able to apply to a coachee that has transformed their life?
It just sometimes even sharing the stories of patients who are, I work in a underserved area. I work in the oldest public hospital in the United States. And so we see a lot of undocumented patients, a lot of immigrants, a lot of patients who don't have insurance,
Right.
and patients who don't have family, who may be homeless, and that sort of thing. And sometimes even just sharing the strength that these patients have, where they know that their life and their time is limited, and that they still wake up every single day and they're like, I'm going to try to live as best as I can. Sharing those stories and the perspective with my clients, it just gives them a little bit of, clarity to be like, hey, I might be just thinking about this. I might be a little bit too deep in this. What if I pull back? What if I take a 30,000 foot view? Is this going to matter a month from now? Am I going to be worried about this a year from now? 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Is this going to be as big a deal as I'm making it out to be right now? Sometimes the answer is yes, it is. And a lot of the times the answer is maybe not as much. And sometimes just the sheer fact of dissociating and taking some space from that helps people to get the clarity that they need and to move through it and not let it block them and get stuck.
So as I kind of said when we were starting that, the combination of the palliative care and the coaching is a real superpower that you can bring together. And what you've shared with us there is a classic example that people who are maybe haven't had that great fortune in life and they're now towards the end, but they still get up, they still look to live the best life that they can. When you hear a story like that, whatever place you're in, it gives you clarity and probably hope as well that there's an opportunity for me to make a change now whilst I can, rather than being given 6 months notice and then thinking, what am I going to do now? So that's a great combination of the two. As you know, the title of this podcast is Success Matters. And so what does success mean to you? You've been on quite a journey over the last few years. So what does success mean to you now?
I think about this a lot, actually, because I am a classic child of immigrant parents, overachiever. I'm a doctor. I'm all these things. I wear many hats. And I think when I was younger, I just wanted the next thing earlier, right? Like, here's my goal. Great. I crushed it. What's next? What's next? And while that is great and that makes me who I am, and that's helped me realize a lot of things in my life and helped a lot of people as well, the energy with which I brought to it, it was always an energy of lack, that if I just had this, if I did this, if I accomplished this, then I would be good enough. Then, that sort of thing. And now what I'm intentionally working on, I'm not perfect, but what I'm intentionally working on now is grounding myself and reminding myself and looking back and being like, how am I already successful? What have I done? How have I helped one person? Because before I was like, I have to help thousands and millions of people. And then, when that didn't happen, it was like, oh, well, what have I done?
Right.
What have I done that's of value, that's made an impact? And then someone said to me, like, if it's impacted you, is that good enough? If it's impacted one person, is that good enough? 2 people? Like, what's quote unquote enough?
Yeah.
And I think that it was a journey for me to realize, like, enough is what I claim it to be, right? Failure is what I deem it to be. If I say that I only fail if I don't learn a lesson, well, then I never fail. Success is what we deem it to be. And so I think redefining what success means to me, which is how can I be at peace and happy with where I am in life right now, even if it's not necessarily where I think I should be or where I want to go. Like it's okay to want things to be different and to be grateful for things that the way that they are now.
So being at peace with where you are now, is what success means to you.
Yeah, in many ways. I've already done a lot of things, and I'm sure your listeners have already accomplished a lot of things, but we don't give ourselves the credit for it.
Yeah.
We think that being nice to ourselves and having compassion means that we're going to not be driven and disciplined anymore. But in reality, if, your listeners or anyone listening to this cares about success and that sort of thing, you're always going to want that. That's always going to be part of you. It's just that the energy of being nice to yourself will carry you so much further than beating yourself up, telling yourself like what's wrong with you, or saying like you're so stupid, or why can't you do this right, etc. That energy is totally different.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you said something there in the little talk there around being a child of immigrants. Do you think, as I'm a child of immigrants as well, and do you think that we are too hard on ourselves because our parents, push us to try and get a better life, and therefore that kind of creates this self-fulfilling prophecy that you're not good enough?
Yeah, and again, this was something that I didn't really have a handle on, or I wasn't fully aware of until I'd say the past like few years, definitely. My parents came here with $300 to their name and worked, 6 days a week for decades and decades. And it was always like, hey, put your head down, stay humble, don't speak highly of yourself, like, just work, and, be a doctor or be an engineer or whatever, they wanted me to be. And I think it really does create a sort of a complex within us because they had to work and act a certain way just to be seen as equal to people who were already here before they got here, right? And then they passed that down to us. Be like, you have to work harder, hustle harder, and that sort of thing. And as children of immigrants, I think we sometimes forget that we are not our parents, right?
Yeah.
That we live a different life than them, that, what helped them get through and survive during that period of their life may not necessarily be helpful for us or conducive to the futures that we want to create. And so a lot of it for me is unlearning some of the things that my parents have taught me and instilled in me. And not to say that I'm not grateful. I love them, and, they're the best people in the world. And, a lot of the things that they taught me, like keep your head down, don't speak up, have not helped me. It's actually held me back. And that's something that I'm learning to grow out of, especially, as fellow podcasters, right? Sharing our voice with other people and feeling like we're good enough to make an impact, to deliver a message. Like, who am I to have a podcast, that kind of thing. That's a lot of the learning.
Yeah, one of the things that my parents had kind of really instilled in me was this thing about authority and authoritative figures, or people who are in authority, that you've got to kind of doff your cap to them and be humble to them. And in our society, well, certainly in the UK, I'm sure in the US, that doesn't work, right? If you do that, then you're always on the back foot. And it took me a long time. It's only recently that I've recognized that that's how I behave. And so I've had to consciously make a change towards that, and actually be mindful that that's not serving me, that's not really helping me. Do you have anything of that nature that you've come across that your parents had instilled in you, but actually that's not the right thing to serve you now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just going off of what you said right there is, when I was working as an attending, because in medicine, a lot of times you're told to do things, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times you don't always have a say in these things. I was working so much. I worked 91-hour weeks
Cool.
on nights, and I worked like 30 weekends a year and all of these things. And it was not serving me, like you said, but I
Yeah.
just kept my mouth shut.
Mhm.
Or it was like, oh, you just self-sacrifice yourself for the greater good of other people, right? Especially in Eastern cultures,
Yes.
it's the greater good over the individual. Whereas in Western cultures, a lot of times that can be the other way around.
Hmm.
And so it was, I used to go into work with a fever because I didn't want to burden other people with being
Yeah.
sick, right? And that doesn't make sense because I'm supposed to be caring for people and helping them get healthy. And yet here I am, coughing on them or that sort of thing. And that took a toll on my health. There would be times where I went into work, I was so sick, I was so dehydrated. I actually had to ask a nurse to come in my office and give me the intravenous fluids, hydration, just for me to get through my 12-hour shift. I should have been home for the rest of the week, but
Yeah.
I felt so awful and guilty for being sick, for not being good enough or healthy enough, quote unquote, that I did that to myself, and again, so that's a lot of the unlearning that I've had to be like, hey, I can take some time for myself, or hey, I don't necessarily have to, agree with what authority is telling me if it is not in line with my values.
And this actually leads quite well to the question that my last guest asked me to ask you. So my last guest asked me to ask you, and the reason why I think it leads well is because you made a change. So the question is,
I'm obsessed with this, so I'm going to ask them.
okay,
What is their morning routine?
Ooh, great question. I am a chronic alarm clock snoozer for many,
Okay.
many years. And
how many times do you press the snooze button?
well, prior to making the change, it
Yeah.
would be like 2, 3, 4 times.
Okay.
And I would always be the one when we go out with my friends on vacation. They would wake up at the crack of dawn, and I would wake up at 10 or 11 o'clock, and they'd have already, talked and chatted and gone out and had breakfast. So now, intentionally, my morning routine now is I wake up, I get more morning light. If anyone listens to the Huberman Lab podcast, so I take a lot of my cues from that podcast. I get morning light to help reset my circadian rhythm. If it's dark in the winter here, then I have one of those artificial lights.
Yeah.
And then I sit and meditate. I will meditate for about 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on what I need that day. On the days that I'm disciplined, I will actually exercise and work out, whether that's a walk or something a little bit more strenuous.
Right.
And then I will get to work. I tend to fast in the mornings, so I don't really eat until noonish.
Okay.
And on some mornings, I work 50%. So some mornings I go straight to work, and some mornings I'm working on my own business and the podcast. So
Right.
depending on the day, my schedule's a little bit different.
You've now got a regular wake up time. You're not hitting the snooze button.
Well, no, I actually, if you can believe this, I actually wake up at 6:30 now. Sometimes I'll wake up at 6 a.m. And if you had asked me, you told me that I'd be doing that 5 years ago or when I was a teenager, I'd have been like, you're lying. There's no way. There's no way I could do that. And isn't it cool that as humans, we can change?
It is. You're right. It's so cool. And as a teenager, I don't think any teenager happily gets up at 6 o'clock. That's for sure. But yeah, it's good that you've got this 6 o'clock routine now and the meditation. And do you fast for a specific reason? Is it just you're not hungry first thing in the morning?
And again, I used to be the one that as soon as I woke up, I had to have for food. I fast for a couple of reasons. One, intermittent fasting, and to help with, my dietary goals and that sort of thing.
Right.
And two, I have noticed that when I eat early in the morning, I'm not as sharp.
Uh-huh.
And it started when I was working a lot of weekends, and I had a list of 25 patients, and I had to be very on top of things.
Mm-hmm.
And there were days where I noticed after a while, I was like, oh, I haven't eaten, and I still feel really great. And the days that I did eat early in the morning, it slowed my entire day down. And so it's a combination of those two, that now my body's kind of used to it. I can drink water and coffee and tea and that sort of thing. But I don't really get hungry until 11 or noonish.
Do you have a question for my next guest?
Yes. It's a question that I ask all of my guests when they come on podcasts, which is, what does a life well lived mean to you?
I'm looking forward to that when I ask my next guest.
Yes, I'd love to hear their answer.
Do you have a definition of what that means for you?
For me, a life well lived is just making the most out of what, it's waking up in the morning and being grateful for what I do have, or even waking up to begin with. And it is doing everything that I can to squeeze the most out of life, whether that's the simple moments, being with my loved ones, or some big lofty, hairy goal that I want to achieve. At the end of the day, it's about relationships. For me, it's about making this world a slightly better place for having been here.
But as you say, whether you touch one life or you touch hundreds of lives, right? That's the important part. And it's been really fascinating and interesting hearing your story, Kathy. We're at the top of our time now. If people want to find out more, where should they go? What's the title of your podcast? How can they contact you?
Absolutely. So my podcast is called The Purpose Filter. It's available anywhere you can stream podcasts. I'm also on LinkedIn, Louis Kathy Zhang, and my Instagram is Purpose Filter, and my website, which will hopefully be very soonly completed. Soonly completed is not necessarily hard.
We'll take that word, yes.
Yeah, we'll take it. Is my full name.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure people will take a lot from the insights that you've been able to share with us today.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. You're an excellent interviewer, and I was so glad to be here with you.
Great, thank you. If you'd like to find out more about how you can find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.